Welcome to our week 4 asynchronous session for English 9A. I'm going to give you the first word in our access code before we get started with the recording for the video lesson. The first word is apple. So make note of that, all lowercase, the first word is apple.
Welcome to the week 4 asynchronous session for our class. Today we're going to be talking about literary analysis. Our objective today is to be able to identify and apply the elements of a literary analysis. In units 4 and 5, you're going to begin working on the literary analysis and submitting it in unit 5. So as we work through the unit lesson steps in unit 4, for the project, you're going to work on your brainstorming, and then in Unit 5, you'll work through the steps of writing the essay. So we're going to focus today on reviewing the elements of the literary analysis, how to apply them to the essay that you're going to be writing, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about thesis statements and about textual evidence. So let's review first. The definition of an analysis is to examine something more closely or to analyze something more closely. So we're going to deconstruct it. We're going to take it apart and then we're going to put it back together again, basically. We're going to pull it apart and identify all the different working parts and all the different pieces and explain why they're important to the text, and that's going to comprise the essay. In a literary analysis, which is a type of explanatory writing that deeply analyzes and explains a piece of literature, there are a few different elements that are included in that. So a literary analysis closely examines the elements of a literary text. It can explain the deeper meaning of the elements in the text. It can explain how the parts contribute to the meaning. It can examine the author's technique, and it can show how the literature connects to other literature or to society. So those are the four main elements of literary analysis. They don't all four have to be present, but those are the four major players that we're going to look at in terms of writing our own analysis. There's two things that I want you to avoid when you're writing a literary analysis. The first is summarizing the text. I do not need you to tell me what it's about. This is where having an awareness of your audience comes into play. If you are aware of your audience, and I will be your audience, then you can assume that I have read it because I'm asking you to write an analysis of it. So you do not need to summarize the text and tell me what happened in it. The other thing you want to avoid is reviewing the text. This is not a critique or like a review in the newspaper of the story. This is a breakdown of how the story works and what makes it either successful or unsuccessful. So you aren't going to say, I liked this story because that is not a relevant piece of information to include in your analysis. All right, so those are the two things you want to avoid. All right. Answer the questions associated with this portion of the video, and then you can move on to the next one, but we're going to focus on writing that thesis statement and using those elements of literary analysis further into our brainstorming and planning process.
Hi again, welcome back from the first video. Now it's time for your second word. Hopefully you wrote down that first one. The second one is chips. Don't forget the plural S, chips. Okay, so let's move on to thesis statements. Let's talk about that. What is a thesis? A thesis statement is the basis of your essay. It tells your reader what you are writing about, and it is arguable. You want to make sure that your statement is not generic, and so it must be specific, and it must be directional, but it also must state something that is thought-provoking. If it's a true or false statement, it doesn't work as a thesis statement. It needs to be something that identifies something specific about the story. Well, how do we do that? The big question is, well, how do I do that, Mrs. Sandine? How do I write a clear and focused thesis statement? We want to avoid general statements. We want to make sure that our statement discusses the impact that the actions of the character have on the play or on the text or on the audience. Why is your idea important? If it is an obvious statement, it's probably not arguable. So let's take a look at a couple examples of what I mean by that. If we take the play Romeo and Juliet, for example, we all have heard of Romeo. Romeo, just the term Romeo, is identified with being a romantic. So stating in a literary analysis about Romeo, saying Romeo is a romantic. Well, it's true. It's also obvious to the reader. We want to make sure that we're giving our reader something to ponder, to think about. So how can we change that to a more arguable thesis? We could say Romeo is passionate and romantic, and his love for Juliet drives his actions in the play. Okay, this is better. But why is this important? Why does it matter that his actions drive, or that his emotions drive his actions? What impacts does it have on the story? Let's look at this last one. In Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Romeo evolves from a superficial romantic to a character passionately in love. This love drives his actions in the play, ultimately causing his own demise and the demise of his beloved Juliet. So if we evaluate this as a thesis statement, let's look back at our criteria. It's arguable because I could say, I don't know that his actions were the reason that Juliet came about her demise. I think we could argue that that wasn't the only reason. Okay, so it's arguable. Is it clear? It is clear because it identifies to me as the reader that the writer of this essay is going to specifically identify Romeo and the evolution of his character from point A, superficial romantic, to point B, character passionately in love. So it's a specific statement. It's also directional and it's arguable, so that it has our main components of a thesis statement, which are that it, is arguable, that it's directional, and that it's specific. So keep those things in mind when we evaluate thesis statements. So if we talk about our project for Unit 4 and 5, hopefully you've noticed that Unit 4 and 5 are a corresponding project, meaning in Unit 4 you're going to work on the brainstorming steps. Please don't skip these steps. They are essential. So many people say, I don't need to do that. Yes, you do, because brainstorming, building your essay, and walking through the outline help you in the future. They help you build a better essay, I promise. So for Project 4 this week, we are just focusing on the brainstorm portion. One of the steps is to write a thesis statement, and this is your prompt. You're going to write a 5-paragraph literary analysis of The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. So in that prompt, it asks you to choose one character from the story and analyze how that character changes throughout the story. Explain how this character's development affects the meaning of the story. Include an introductory paragraph, 3 body paragraphs, and a concluding paragraph. Provide sufficient textual evidence to support your ideas. Okay, step number 1, choose a character. Step number 2, identify how that character changes. Step number 3, explain how the character's development impacts the story as a whole. Why does it impact the meaning? What would it mean if the character hadn't evolved that way? So think about it in that regards. If the character hadn't changed or evolved, the story would end differently. It would have a different context. It would have a different meaning. What meaning is that? All right, so go forth, go through to the next set of questions, complete those questions. If you have any questions, or especially if you need help writing a thesis statement for this project, please let me know.